Today's IMIS Donman webinar, Advanced Visrep Reporting. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lisa Amaritis and I'm the Client Retention Specialist here at ASI Asia Pacific. Today's webinar will run for under an hour, finishing just around 3 p.m. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping matters to ensure we're all up to speed with using the GoToWebinar system. So on the front middle of your screen, you should see the first slide of the presentation, and to the right, there's a control panel. You can minimize the control panel down to a toolbar by clicking on the little orange grab tab arrow. This will allow you to view the presentation in full screen. You can then click on the arrow to bring the control panel up again, should you wish to. Right now, everyone has been muted to allow for clear audio, and we won't be opening those lines today. We do welcome your questions and comments though, so please let me explain how you can do this. You can post your questions or comments at any time using the control pane in the control panel. Just type your question or comment in the box provided and click on the send button. We'll address those questions and share the comments at the end of the main presentation. And if you have any technical difficulties with GoToWebinar, you can easily use the question pane or use the raise hand function and I can assist you directly. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Gary Lincoln. Gary is a Senior Technical Support Analyst here at ASI Asia Pacific, and he will take you through today's topic, Advanced Visrep Reporting. Thanks, Gary. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. This is a continuation of the subject that we started last month, looking at Visrep reporting in a fairly basic way last month. And what we're going to look at today is more advanced options. For those who weren't part of the webinar last month and didn't get the opportunity, you can see up here, I'm in the Visual Report Writer, normally called Visrep if we're talking to you. But up here it's showing that I'm reporting on the donation file. I'm sorting it based on the pay method, the amount, and record number. So record number is just a number that the system maintains for its own capabilities, basically, but it means it's totally unsorted, so it doesn't really matter if you use that. Okay. From there, I'm then using, because I'm reporting on donation, but I want to report on donors that are of a particular donor category. So in this case, I'm choosing the donor type equals individual. And from there, I'm using the donation date greater than or equal, in this case, just the first of the first 17. The bottom half of the screen is where I select the fields that I want to have in my output. So if I was doing this purely for a mailing, then I might choose fields from the donor record in here based on, address, suburb, state, postcode, all of those things that we'd normally use. Okay. In this case, it's pretty much I've selected some of the fields. So you can see on the right-hand side here, if it's coming from the donation file, it'll have donation, then the field name. And from donors, it'll have donors and then the field name, so as we go through. Once I've got to this stage of my report and I click on preview, I can see I'm pretty much getting the results that I wanted. In this case, because we've sorted it based on the pay method, I can see I've got my Amex, my cash, check, diners, and different pay methods that have been entered on transactions as they've been recorded. If I go to the bottom of the report, so I have all my data, but I don't have any totals, I don't have any counts, I don't have anything like that normally I'd want to have if I was going to use this as a printed report. If I'm primarily looking to just create some data to put into Excel or do something else with, then that becomes sort of irrelevant. I don't need those. But what I will show you is how to add those things to your reports, because sometimes you find that you don't have to do a lot of stuff to the data in Excel. If it's already formatted and looks the way you want it to look, you can just change it here and then go through and say, look, I've already got my amount showing as currency, so I don't have to go into Excel, because as a raw figure, it will just have 150. It won't have the .00 on the end because it's just a number. Yeah. So to do more of the tidy up and design work on your reports, click on the Design tab. And in here, you'll start seeing things where all of the fields that are part of my donor my report that I've selected are now showing in here, and I can do different things with them. So in the case of donor number, I might say total that column and count. So I don't want to sum them. I do want to count how many donors there are. So again, if we go back to preview, down the bottom, it's now showing me that there's 75 records selected. So if I had a few pages, I'm not going to sit there and try and count, how many pages there are. So the same sort of thing, we can then say, well, now I want to total the dollar amount. So the same principle, go back to the design tab, and this choose the amount column. In this case, I can do total, and I'm going to sum, because in this case, I want to get the total dollar amount in my report that meets my criteria. So again, go to the bottom of page 2. Okay, so now I'm getting how many transactions there are and the total dollar amounts. Even though I've sorted by the pay methods, at the moment I'm not getting a breakdown of how many donations were of the particular pay methods and what the total is for each one. Again, back to the design tab, and in this case I can say what I'm looking for is my methods and my pay methods, and instead of doing a total or a count like I did previously, I can now say group on column. If we go back to preview now, you'll see my report looks totally different. So now I am getting them grouped based on the Amex cards, and then I've got the total for the Amex, if there's only one Amex and $10. The same here as I go down. If I can move that. Okay, so I've got my cash, my check, my donors, so I'm still getting my full breakdown of the different donor types. I'm in the donation pay methods, but in this case, it's giving me a heading and also a subtotal for each of those categories as we go through. So when we print, you won't see those lines that are going down the page, so they're not going to really be in the way at all. But having it set like that means that if I do the subheading, it also gives me a bit more room on my report to fit some data in. Because where I have something like this and I've got the amount and I've got the campaign code, money is normally right justified, and of course text is left justified. So sometimes I start to get to the point where I've got quite a few data sets, like I have down here, and it starts to get a little bit hard to read what the column is here for the campaign. So there's two options I could use there. If I go back to design, okay, this time I'm looking for campaign code. Okay, so on the left-hand side here, you'll see by default it's left justified, but I could center justify it. Probably wouldn't right justify it though. Okay, so normally I'd do left or center. Or the other thing, if I just want to put a couple of spaces so that my report is a little bit more readable, I can click at the beginning of that column, just put in a couple of spaces. And if I go back to preview, you'll now see that that's moved my campaign code just a little bit across. So it's not bumping into my dollar amounts anymore. So my readability of the report goes up quite a bit. If perchance I didn't want the details of the donations, like I didn't want to know who it was, what they paid, all of those details, but I've now got pretty much what I want, one of the other options under the design tab is to do totals only. Okay. So that will now basically just give me the different pay methods, how many transactions, and the total of the dollar amounts based on the criteria that I set on the very first tab here. So once you get to that point, you can say, okay, well, that's sort of what I'm looking for. I'm getting the total number of transactions. I'm getting my total dollar amount, but it doesn't sort of stand out in any way, shape, or form. To make your report a little bit nicer, you can, under the Design tab, put in a heading here. Okay, based on obviously something more meaningful than what I've just written, just so that you can have that on your report. So when you print it out, you can then click on center here. We'll center the whole report on the page so it sits nice and central. From there, because there's different sections of the report now, you can click up here on fonts and say for the title, I don't want it to be Arial 9 point. If it'll behave on me, okay. So I can then go through and say, well, I'm happy to leave them at Arial, or again, you can change the font to be anything that's available on your computer pretty much. Okay. So if we choose something like Broadway, and say, look, I want it to be 12 point. and then OK. Okay, so that will come out on my report. If I wanted to change the color, the same sort of thing, I can sort of go through, say, yes, I've got that, but I don't want it to be black. I want it to be navy blue. Okay, and again, if I don't want that, I can change the font. Okay, I want calibri there. I want it in bold and 18. Okay, and you get a bit of a preview on this screen as well. So then for your, your page header, your subheader, so I might say, look, I'm happy with that, but I want it to be in bold and 10 point. And then also for my total. Okay, so then OK. So now I'm getting basically more of these are bolded so that I can see that. So even if I had full data set showing, I could then see all of those details as I go through. If you save the report or you come up with a style where you've said, look, I've set the heading, what I want the heading to be, what I want the titles up here, the totals, etc. What you can do up here is say save style, give it a name. So in this case, I've got default top of the report if you want. Okay. So down the bottom here, you can say has image. You can find the image file. That'll then show on your report here. If you need to move the report down to make room for your graphic, just drag it down, put your graphic in there. But so it's really saying that you can customize these reports far and beyond what lots of people have been doing. It's, just pulling out the data is good, but it's sometimes you want something a bit nicer. So if I go back to design now, take off my totals only, back to preview. Okay, so now you can see that the data in the middle, just like most reports, is still in the font that it was. It's not bold, but I am now getting my headings in bold and I'm getting my totals in bold. Okay, so a few things you can do as far as organizing that. If I had a report that I said, look, I'm happy with how it comes out and everything, but I don't want to keep changing dates and things like that when I run the report. Okay, so that takes us into the next area where we can start, putting in some sort of preset formats for reporting and things like that. So at the moment, I've got donation date is greater than or equal to the 1st of the 1st this year. Okay. If I take that out and I just put a Y in, down the very bottom of down the bottom of the screen here, you can see date. So it's interpreting what Y is. So for what these things actually mean and what you can use them for, sometimes take a little bit of thinking. But if I click on the F button here without putting in a date, we'll give you an example of the sorts of things that you can use for date fields. Okay, so just like anywhere else in Donman, if you just put T, it's going to be today's date. You can do, T minus a certain date, or greater than or equal a certain date. So if I were to do something like T, okay, so again, you can see T is interpreted to today's date. Okay, so if I do minus 14, so it's something that's going to be for the last 2 weeks, then you can see down the bottom here, it's already changed to suit the criteria. So it means if I've got a report that I'm running, say, at the beginning of every week, I want to run a report for the previous week, I can then just do something like T minus 7. And that will always be a week ago. So it doesn't matter what it does. I don't then have to change that report criteria. I can then just have people run that. If we were doing something with a month, then I can do M minus M1. Okay. So again, M is the first day of the current month, and minus M1 means minus 1 month. So again, we can see down there that that's now taking me back to the 1st of the 10th, 2017. If I do that and don't put in a second criteria, I will get everything from that date till today, which in most cases isn't what we're requiring. Yeah, you can do that, of course, but normally if I'm using dates like this in a preset, I'm doing it for the previous week or the previous month. So I can then add new criteria. So what I need to add to sort of restrict what's going to happen here, again, I can choose the donation date, but I can now say less than M. Okay, so again, M down the bottom here, showing me that it's the first of the current month. So it means that I don't then have to worry about if there's a month with 30 days, 31 days, February's got 28. I don't have to change the criteria of the report because the system will know that if it's M, it's the first of the current month, and it'll just look at everything greater than the first of the previous month. So when I run my report, I don't have to worry about changing this criteria at all. So that's good for things just like putting in the dates and things like that. And one of the other things that is possible, and I don't know if anyone actually does this or has done this yet, but what I can do is put in a prompt so that when I run the report, where I've got here and said, look, the dates aren't going to change, that's fine, but I might want to do the report on a different donor category or a donor type. So what I can do, if I go into this field here, if I put my characters around it like this and save that report, so save report format. Okay, so if I close the report, exit, didn't need to, anyway, open report format. Okay, so webinar test. Okay, so it's telling me that this report's got a temporary index, so I say yes, and that's how I get it to sort based on my pay methods. But you can now see it's also brought up a prompt referring to the donor type. So if I said, look, I'm only looking for donor type business, then I can just change that there. Okay, and that's now changed the output of my report. But it means that every time I run the report, I'm not going to have a set report that's always looking at individuals. I can go through and now it's got business. So if I save that, next time by default it'll be business. But if I want to change it, I've got that option at the time I open the report up. So that's a fairly useful thing when we have reports that we might build for another user. So what happens in the case here, I'll just put this back so I get a few more results than the couple that I've got. Okay, so if I save that report again and get out of the report writer. Okay, so one of the options when you have a visual report file that you've created or someone else created for you is add it to your user menu. Okay, so the user menu is something that you can add any program that's part of the Donman standard menu, or you can add visual reporter reports to it. So if I go into options, add a Visrep save report to my user menu. Okay, so I can now get this sorted. Yes. Okay, so you can see all of my different reports that are saved there, like there's heaps of them here, obviously. Okay, but it means that if I've got a report that I want to add to that, and mine unfortunately is looking in the wrong folder, it's not giving me, but I'll show you one of these. Okay, so if I choose this report here, I don't actually need the Visrep report bit on it because that'll be sort of self-explanatory when I see the icon that's on the menu. So if I save that, so you can see that's now saved the report onto my user menu. So at any time at all, I'm in Donman and I said, oh, I want to run that report. I don't have to go through reports, reporter, visual reporter, open, do all of those steps. I can now go straight to user menu, just click on the report, and then that will bring up the results, which means the person who's running that doesn't need to know necessarily these two steps to see how the report was put together, but they can if they want to. Because most of the time it's just getting to this point here to say, look, all I want is to see the results. If perchance I was creating something and I said, all I want to do with this really is create a text file of the output. Okay, so if I right click on that, I can remove that from my user menu. If I go back to options, add a Visrep save report to my user menu. Okay, so okay, so again, any report at all. So if I use something like this Okay, so if I've got my report, and in this case I put a /t, means it will by default create a text tab delimited file of the output of this report, which means I won't see it as a print preview on the screen or anything like that. The text file by default will be created and will be the same name as the report. Okay, so if I do save, okay, so you can see the screen that came up that time was just showing me that it's actually running the report, but I didn't see the output that I would have seen if I've just set it up to be the standard shortcut to the report, which will open on that preview tab. So that's a handy thing. If here's the same criteria that I'm running every month. It may be based like I've done previously on the M minus M1 or less than current month, being just the M. And all I want to do really is get those details, so yes, and export it to a text file. Okay, so I don't want to do anything else other than that. Then that's a good option and a way to get around that. Okay. So one of the other things I can do with the report writer is say, look, I don't necessarily want to have title, first name, surname, all as separate columns. Okay. So if you right click on title and go to the option here, and then there's an edit, delete or merge. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to look at merge. So then I'd say, well, what I want to do is merge first name and surname into the one field, and I'm just going to call it name. Okay, so now that I've done that, I just need to make that column wider. Okay, so now I've basically got a report that's showing me the name in full rather than having the three separate columns. Okay, so quite a few things you can do as far as getting your reports from that basic, yes, I've got, names and addresses or phone numbers or donation amounts and things like that. It's really saying, look, we want to go to the next style and say, look, I want to do something else with this. I don't want to just sort of stick it at the mundane report as we go through. So as I'd mentioned before, you can do the report heading, you can put a graphic on the report, whatever it may be, you can sort of go through and add that to the report. And when you save that, that will become part of the report. The same back on the data tab, when I go through, in this case, where I've created a sort order that isn't one of the standard sort orders, you can see down here it's got temporary. Okay. So if I was to say, look, I want to sort this report differently, down the bottom here, all of the ones up here are the preset reports that are already part of the data, and you can choose any of those as you go through. Yeah. But sometimes in the case like this, where I'm trying to find out, how many different pay types I've got, so how many different pay methods, and then campaigns and dates and whatever it is from there, I can set up the actual index down here. So click on Create Temporary Index, and all of the fields are now part of what I can choose as the index. So again, if I said, look, I want to choose the pay method, okay, then the campaign code, then the donation date, something like that, and then okay. So normally that will take longer on your own system, but it will go through and build a temporary index based on what I've selected here, so that when I do my report, I can start getting the totals out. So I can start getting, things that are grouped together. And at the moment where I've grouped, and I've got grouped Visa, but I could also then choose the next level down for the campaign to say, okay, how many auto deductions were paid by Visa as opposed to general donations. So that would take me back to the design tab, okay, where I can use my campaign code, again, group on column, back to preview. Okay, so now I'm getting cash, okay, and then Gen Don. So as you go through, you'll start seeing more detail of the report. So how you sort the report is crucial to getting the results looking the way you want them to look. Okay? So if I want to sort based on, the pay method and then the campaign, I need to make sure that my sort at the beginning here reflects that. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So just to show that as an example, if I just go back to say donation date campaign and go back to my report, okay, I'm going to start seeing that I get that to refresh, that I get stuff that sort of doesn't fit into the sort anymore. So I'm getting pay method cash is showing down the bottom here, and pay method cash is up here again. So I'm no longer sorting that way, so I can't get the total the way I want. So all of my totals really aren't going to work for me if I do it that way. To remove a total, just like we did previously, to add it, choose the field again up here. Just take that off, okay, and go backwards. Okay, so very easy to add them or take them away, depending on what you're looking for. Okay, so again, I can undo that. Okay, so now I'm getting back to pretty much just raw data. So it's basically what you'd expect to see normally. Okay, so the same way we added the fields for the name, campaign code method, but then I'd say, well, look, I want to add street 1, street 2, suburb, state, postcode. It's the same thing. Go across, merge. It's okay, we want to add street 2, suburb, state, postcode, and we just call it address. Okay, so in this case, having the address altogether has made it not quite so readable. Okay, so very easy to sort of add them and put them together. Otherwise, if we right-click, go back to address, and say, in this case, I want to unmerge the columns. Okay, so I can get everything back again. Just reshrink my columns to fit on the page. Try not to crap the headings if I can. Okay, so sometimes we can put fields together and it does increase our readability or the way we can use the data. But as you can see, when I do suburb, state, postcode, not necessarily a good thing. If I know that I've got a report that never had anything in a column, then just remove the column. It's no good having it there. But in the case of street addresses, there may be times where you have a record that has got something in street 2 or even street 3. So it's a matter of trying to make enough room to fit all the stuff on your report that you're looking for. So there's sort of the basics of taking it from that very, from that very basic where I just said, look, when I first go in, I choose which data file, I want to report on. The 4 main ones are up the top here. So it's pretty much, it's people, it's money, it's campaigns, it's pledges, but every other file that's in the system is available to be reported on. Not every file links back to everything else. As an example, if I go from the donation file, so I can see my donation links back to donors, also in this case links to volunteer, campaign and memoriam, because all of these are linked to a single transaction. But I can't go from the donors back to a donation because I've got multiple donation records, or hopefully multiple donation records for each donor. So my logic in the criteria says that I've now got a multiple to 1 ratio. So each donation record becomes its own file, basically, or its own record that links back to the one donor. So to show an example of that, if I was just to choose my donation and said, I just want to sort it by donor number, donation date, and I just want to put in some very basic details like that. Okay, so by itself, not very helpful, but you can see here I've got donor 1 now is showing up a whole lot of times. So if I were to add names and things to the report, then I'm going to see the same name coming up over and over and over because I've got this single record here is linked back to the one donor record. Okay? So sometimes when we look at how we're trying to do the report and what we're trying to pull out, means we have to look at how the data is actually stored and how it relates. I mean, sometimes you just won't know, and sometimes we have to play around with it. Or, like most people do, log a support job and say, how can I get this data out? Because there's some fields that will update, automatically, and some that we have to update, etc. But there's, a lot we can certainly do with this, and it's a very flexible program. Okay, so if I were to go like the campaign, for instance, it'll say I'm changing the report, it'll change the sort order. But again, in my criteria or my fields now, I can't go any further than campaign. Campaign's basically the end of the line, like donors. There's only one campaign record that will have multiple donations linked to it. So that's why from the donation file, I can link back to a single campaign and pull out details from the campaign record that I can't do from the campaign back to the donation. So I can pull up, any field that's part of the donation, the campaign record or the donor record. So the code, the name, all of those fields that you see on the campaign screen can be selected, but I can't get down to individual transactions unless I use the donation file up here. Yeah. So for most reports and sort of the logic of how things are, that's normally the toughest battle, is just understanding that, when you have things like donations or pledges or things like that, because a person can have more than one of those records under a single donor, they're all going to be single records. So if I pull out the donor details, I'm going to potentially see the donor multiple times. But in the case of something like this, again, I just choose donor number. I said, okay, I'm not going to put any criteria in at the moment. So if I do donor number, go back to donors, sort by number. Okay. So by default, when you come in here, the fields are sorted alphabetically, which for sometimes is a better way to find fields, but the most commonly used fields like donor number, first name, surname, position, company, street one, they're all pretty much near the top part of the file, because when the data was originally set up and structured, that's how it came together. So if I were to add title, first name, surname, company, street, not street two, remove, suburb, okay, and preview. So you can see that now I'm getting a whole lot for donor one. So in this case, I haven't added the amount, but that's not what I'm trying to show. It's really saying that all of these link to the one donor. So this is where, when you do reports, sometimes outside of Visrep, that you see like a campaign report, etc., will show you a number, and that is the number of transactions, not necessarily the number of donors. So if I've got something like this and said, well, that's lovely, but there's way too many records, I just want to find people that meet my criteria and only have them come out once. Okay. So what I can do up the top here is go to File, Save Report Data, and if you're up to date with Donman, you'll have the 4 different methods. If you're, I think it's about 7.514 or maybe 13, there wasn't an option for an Excel file. Okay? But you can always output to text. Okay? So if I do text, it'll be exactly what I see in the screen here. It'll be every single record. So if I'm just trying to find out how many donors meet my criteria, I can then output the results as a selection file. Okay, so just put in the name, and you'll see there's an option on the screen here that says remove duplicates. So normally when I do a selection file, I don't want to have the same donor showing up in that selection file multiple times. If I'm running a report where I've saved the report, the selection file name, the same as the text output name, will always default to the same as the campaign name, the report name. So that if I'm doing it for a specific purpose, the report details will always show the same name as the report file itself. Okay, so if I just do OK, so that'll run through, and what that's now done is create a list of donor numbers that I can use in Donman to find out how many actual people there are. Okay, so I don't have a way in the report writer to say only show me unique values, because that sort of defeats the purpose of my criteria here, which is non-existent, and I'm, pardon me, looking at all records, and I've just selected these fields. So if we just sort of be too open-ended with our report, we're probably going to get a whole lot of data that may not be helping us in the end. Adding a little bit of criteria may certainly help. So when we do the criteria, by default, it's going to go, because I'm using the donation file up here, It's showing me I can do criteria based on the donation file, or again, I can go back to even the campaign record. So if I said, here's all the fields now from the campaign. So if I said, I just want to report on all donations where the campaign is still open. Okay, so then I can use something like the close date equals nothing. If you're not quite sure of values in a field, when you go to your comparison here, so it's basically equals, not equal, less than or equal, etc. If I click in the value box, and because in this case it's got a date, I've also got the F button for the functions for dates, but then there's also a question mark. If I click on the question mark, it will give me an idea of how many different dates I've got in my campaigns and how many records I've got those. So the same for donors, for codes or anything like that. If I said, as an example, my criteria is going to be based on donors, and again on donor type equals. So if I go back to the value now, you see I haven't got the F because I'm not using a date field, but I can click on the question mark, and that will then build a list based on my data to show me how many business records, so each of my donor categories, it's giving me a count. And sometimes, that's what people are after. You're saying, okay, look, I just want to know how many different, records I've got in my system that are part of this field. Okay. So that works pretty good for most fields. Okay. The odd one out, of course, is extra codes, because on a donor record, you've got 8 extra codes, and there's a plural field called extra codes, which contains the whole 8, and that allows me to search. But in the case of doing something like this to get a breakdown, I can't do that, but I can do a selection file to find out, how many people have got, say, board in their extra code or any of the other extra codes as we go through. So when we put in our criteria, by default, it's always whatever the field is in record number. So as I said, donor number equals, in this case, I'll just do donor 1. Okay, so again, I've already got my fields down here, but I now want to show how much they paid, what campaign, what date, which ledger code, and the receipt number. Okay. So go back to preview. So again, my page is sort of going off because I've got too many fields, and this will normally happen also when you start adding full names and addresses and suburb, state, postcode, all of those things. There's just too much physical data to fit on a printed page. Okay, so if I go page setup, landscape, and okay, so now I can see, okay, that's fine. I've got that list, and where some of the columns, like suburb is way bigger in this case, then I can shrink that down if I need to. If we've put a column where it doesn't suit, and we say, look, I just want to move that around a little bit, whatever. So then if in the case, say, donation date here, I want to move that to the end. So you can just drag and drop. Okay. So depending on how many columns you've got in your data, like in your report, that can sometimes cause a bit of a headache with moving them around like that. So when you're getting to the initial point of doing your report and you choose your fields here, choose wisely. It just makes life a lot easier when you get to that final result. If you said, look, this is how I want it to look. So, even if you jot it down on a piece of paper to say, okay, what fields do I want in what sort of order, so that if I put them into the correct order here, I don't have to then muck around and do it in the report itself. Okay, so most of the time you're not going to have an issue with it, but I have had people that have had very large reports, and they've had something like 50 columns, 60 columns, etc. And once I start moving them around, because of how it stores where the columns are and orientation and all of those things in the background, it starts to get into a bit of a twisted knot, and columns don't move properly and things like that. So a little bit of work up front will sometimes save you a whole lot of pain, basically, to go through and do that as you go. Yeah. So again, if I'm just choosing, in this case, I've just selected one donor, but I'm getting the same name coming out and the same suburb coming out every time. And I said, well, again, I don't really want that. So I'll change this to, we'll do a donor that's actually got an address. Okay, so now I've got title, first name, surname, and suburb. Okay, so in this case, there's no company, but I can still add those fields together. So if I said, look, I want to make this a little bit more readable, if I go to donor number, okay, merge, I can now merge with title, first name, surname, company, and suburb. Okay, so at the moment, because the field originally was right justified, okay, so I can go through now and say, okay, what I need to do, it's still called donor number, to say I want to left justify that. Okay, and then under design again, I say I want to now group it. So if I did have a number of donors, what it allows me to do now is have the donor number, the name or company, if that was part of their suburb, whatever I've added to that is now a heading on the report, and now it's showing me all the donations for that donor as a subtotal. So again, like we did previously, I can now go back to say amount, I want the total and sum. Okay, and campaign, I can say, look, just total and count. Okay, so at the end of my report, okay, so I'll then be able to see the total the donor's given, because in this case there's only one donor, so I'm getting that as a subtotal and a grand total, and they both match. So you can see there's 110 transactions, $4,126.72. Yeah, so from a very basic, starting report, you can start to do some things with Visrep that'll, help structure these reports better and things like that. Okay, so what I might do now is hand back to Lisa, and we'll see if people have got some questions about Visrep or using it, and see what we can sort out for you.
Thanks, Gary. We've got a couple of questions. The first one here, can you please advise how I can create a report which shows the average donation amount over the last 12 months, any inactive donors who have not donated in the last 24 months, and donations via postcode?
Well, they're all a little bit specific. Okay, so average is a toughie, because what we have to do, sorry, one of the things I haven't touched on, because it sort of goes into a sort of a next level again, is, I don't know, open my report. Okay, no, yes, okay. So in my report, and I go to the design tab, so at the moment I've sort of showed you things that you can do over here, but on the right hand side here, there's an option where you can add a calculated field. Okay. So this means that if I've got something that I can say, like we do in Excel, we can say, if this equals this, then do this, and things like that. So this is somewhere I have to know, like the donation total for a donor, or total this year, etc., and count. So if I've got the total and the count of transactions, then I can work out an average. Okay. So something like that is probably a bit more than most people want, but if you log a support job, we can sort of go through that in more detail. For things like people who've given a certain number of gifts in a date range, I'll just jump back to a donor's screen for a minute. On each donor's record, on the second screen, you'll see there's a donation total and a donation count, and you can see that correlates to the report that we just did. So in this case, I've got a total this year, total last year, and a count for both fields. Yeah. So if I wanted to use these as part of my reporting, these don't update automatically. So the donation total and the donation count does, but the total this year and last year rely on us running a report or running a program. So once a year in housekeeping. So the very last one is update new year donor totals. Okay. So if I'm running calendar year or financial year, just put in the date you want to start from, and just yes, it'll then go through all of your donor records and recalculate that second screen. So when we look at a donor again, okay, so in this case it hasn't changed, so it must have already been set on that. But it means that if I've now got the total last year. I've got the count last year, total, previous years, etc. I could then use this and say, what we want to do in our calculated field is look at the total last year or total this year divided by the count. And that would then give us an average. Okay. But average can be skewed very badly based on, someone's giving you a higher than normal donation, or they've given you a very low donation, or, they might have purchased something where there's postage or something, and that will skew all your results. So it can be a little bit iffy. For things like people who've given in a certain date range, the last field here where it's got last donation will show me the date of last gift, okay, and date of first gift and last three. So this is something I can then use in my report. So if we go back to Visrep quickly, and so in this case, I'm going to report on donors. I'll just sort them by donor number in this case, but I can now say I'm looking for donors, date last, greater than or equal, and if I did Y minus Y2 or something like that for 2 years ago, so you can see down there, it's from the first to the first 15. So that way you can find people that have given in the last couple of years, or if you said less than, this will be people who haven't given a gift since before the 1st of the 1st, 2015. Okay. So hopefully that puts you onto the way. So what was the third part of that one, Lisa?
The third part was donations by postcode.
Okay, donations by postcode. There is a preset report for that, but if you wanted to do it, you can do donations. But like I was saying before, when we do the sorting, if I'm trying to do a count or total on postcode, I have to make sure that I create an index in here that's going to give me that sort order. Okay, so if perchance if I go through and I didn't have postcode in the donation file, then I'm sort of out of luck, because it's going to say, well, out of luck, you can't do that. So if I said I've got postcode and I've got donation date, and say campaign code. Okay. So then if at the moment I won't put any criteria in, but I can then do postcode, donation date, amount, campaign, whatever other fields I want. Okay, so at the moment I've got a whole lot of records. Obviously you can see there's no postcode on them, and looking at the dates is sort of explanatory why that might be. But that's how I can do it. As long as I've sorted that, I could then go back to preview and say, look, I want to group on the postcode. So I've got all of those together. And then for my amounts, I want a total and sum them. And if I go back to totals only, okay, so you can now see I've got different postcodes and the dollar amounts. So, but that's how you can use Visrep to do that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gary. Next question we've got, instead of looking at the whole donor file, is it possible to just use an already created selection file of donors for a Visrep report?
Yes, it is, but what you need to do is have something on the donor's record, especially if you wanted to, report on, say, donations. So on the donor record, if we jump back again, so there's two fields on the screen here. This one's normally where I've got no receipt. This one's normally flag 1 and flag 2. These are fields that are very easily set by using a selection file. So if I've got a selection of people, go into donor appeals, and you'll see in here there's a program that says set flags via selection file. So what it means is that I can choose my selection file here, and I can set one of the flag fields to be true or false. If I was doing it initially and said, look, I'm not quite sure if somebody has already got that marked, if I say no to backup, of course, it's going to throw me back to the menu. Okay, so I could go through and say, yes, I want to do this to every donor in the system, and I want to change all of these to no, so that I'm starting a blank slate. Okay. Then I could do it again, yes, for my selection of people. 110 people, I want to change flag 1 to yes. Okay, so that's basically earmarked the people that were in my selection file, and I've now got something on each of their records so that when I go back to my report writer, and again I can choose donation, sort it however you want, but in my criteria, I can now go back and say, look, I'm only looking for people who, on the donor record, have got whatever you've called, if yours is called different, like mine's got no receipt, equals. Okay, so we can see we've got 109 records there. Okay, so I'd say in my selection file, there's someone who's not in my system anymore. Okay, but then I can do the criteria, and that's then allowing me to use just that selection of people, and I can choose any of the fields as I do in the normal report. But if I don't have something on the donor record that identifies they're part of that file, either a code or something, near on impossible, because I can't just use a selection file and then tie it up to a data file.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gary. That's the last question that we have. We will wrap it up. Thank you again, Gary, for that informative webcast. We'll have a recording of this as well as all of our previous webcasts at the Donman website at www.donman.net.au. You'll find it under Resources, Recorded Webcasts, via the Client Support Portal, or posted in our regular newsletters. This is the last webcast that we've got for the year, so we'll be in touch shortly with details of the 2018 schedule. Thanks again for taking the time out of your afternoon to join us today, and indeed for all of our webcasts over the year. This concludes our webcast, so thanks again and goodbye for now.